Hey everybody, Evan Kirstel here with a super exciting chat designed to explore the quantum horizon. So much exciting stuff happening in the quantum computing and quantum world in general. I'm excited to have a real expert, a guru, if you will, 30 years in the compute industry with Lawrence Gasman. Lawrence, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate your time. And I'm super excited. Before we dive in, perhaps introduce yourself, if you would, a little bit about your story and what you're doing these days in the research space.
Well, I don't know how much you really want to know about my story, but my name is Lawrence Gasman. For the purposes of this interview, I'm the president of IQT Research, which is essentially the same thing as something called Inside Quantum Technology. We arrange conferences. We have one coming up in October in New York, but we do them worldwide um, on quantum technology and also publish reports on the latest in quantum technology and its commercialization in particular. And just before we kick off, from the perspective of commercialization, the areas that quantum covers is quantum computing, obviously, quantum cybersecurity. We can talk more about that. Quantum networking, and what have I left out? Quantum sensors. And they all have their own history, but they're all interlinked, or literally interlinked, actually, and with differing potential. I've been doing this. My PhD thesis, I never finished my PhD thesis, but involved a lot of work in quantum. So actually, I learned quantum physics when I was 23 or something. And if you're looking at me now, you'll know I'm not 23 anymore, sadly. So I have a fair amount of knowledge of the physics. What I think we're going to be talking about is the areas I just mentioned, essentially quantum information theory. And that's a much newer field that really only began to develop in the 80s.
Indeed. And it's been a long journey. And to many, it's still a bit of a science project. And I love science and science projects, but we're on the cusp of getting real, are we not, with really promising applications of quantum computing today with the potential to really revolutionize many industries. So, where are we, do you think?
Well, I
We'll
mean,
start with the tech.
I wouldn't say that we were on the edge of commercialization. I'd say we're pretty much commercialized.
Oh, well, you correct, stand corrected.
It depends what you're talking about, and of course, every technology evolves over a period of time. So, 20 years from now, if we were having this interview, I'm sure there'd be new stuff. But
Mm.
if you look at quantum computing, there's certainly practical applications for quantum computing now. It's true that I'm exaggerating a little in that they're fairly limited, but
Mm.
we know for a fact there's certain things you can do with a quantum computer in the real world. And that's become obvious in the last couple of years. On quantum sensors, there have been quantum sensors for a very long time, and now there's some new kinds that are emerging. On quantum networking, well, that is pretty new, really. Because quantum networks send qubits instead of bits, and a lot of that really is at R&D level. And what have I left out? Quantum sensors, quantum cryptography is a
Mm.
subject all on its own, but some parts of it are very practical and being used now. So.
Well, that's exciting. Are there any favorite examples of applications or problems that are being solved today that you like to call out
So
in
the
particular?
Yeah, so um, what people really want to talk about most of the time is quantum computing because
Mhm.
it's kind of inherently cool. Quantum sensors less so because they're sensors that use quantum technology and they're just more sensitive than other kinds of sensors. It's important, but it's not quite as exciting in the usual way. that people think of as exciting with quantum. But we've discovered that even with quite small quantum, so just to be clear, because I've gone through this before, there are about 30 companies now producing quantum computers, and 4 or 5 of them have commercial machines that solve problems and have for quite a while. You can get into debates about whether, when is a quantum computer really a quantum computer? Angels dancing on pinhead kind of questions. But we know, and there was a very interesting paper that came out of IBM a few months ago that shows with small quantum computers, you can model some systems that are very similar to material systems. So if you're looking for designing drugs or designing, new coatings for cars, it seems like we're either at a position where you can make use of quantum computers, or we're so close that it's real in that sense. Now, there's a lot of things that are a long way off, perhaps impossibly far off, but we're looking at real stuff now. And some people are trying to build some companies are trying to build very, very powerful quantum computers with 1 million qubits. And the small quantum computers I was talking about was a couple of 100 qubits. But, they really are quite a long way off. And you'll be able, if such things emerge, to do some fairly spectacular and quite malicious things with them too.
Great. Well, another thing to worry about, but that's on the horizon.
Yeah.
So tell us about the route that quantum has come through over the years. You've seen a lot of government interest for obvious reasons. You said you've seen collaboration between private and public sector, quasi public sector research institutions to advance quantum technology. Has that been the best route? And what have the challenges been in getting quantum to market?
Well, there are a lot of companies. They're private companies. People who own them, I was going to say, take the profits, but mostly at this point they take the losses. There's a few public companies in this space, and I don't think any of them are generating megabucks at this point. That's for the future. But government research is intrinsic to this at quite a few levels. In this country, the national research laboratories have been very active in every aspect of quantum computing, including making the devices that go into quantum computers, in researching networks. We're kind of at a stage where national networks are being considered. Don't ask me how many networking testbeds there are around the country, but it's a lot. And they're mostly with a very heavy government involvement, although it's always joint participation. So a lot of the equipment goes into it. And I'm talking explicitly about this country. A lot of equipment goes into it. It's fairly standard equipment, but comes from some of the big telecom equipment vendors, for instance, and a few companies who are coming up with very novel equipment to build that. So certainly we're at early days, and I don't want to give the impression that, another 3 weeks and you'll go back out to the local computer store and buy your own quantum computer. Actually, I don't know that will ever happen, but it's not really that far off to do certain things.
That's exciting. And I saw something about a desktop quantum computer, so that I didn't know why I wanted it, but I just wanted it. So
yeah, I want one too.
Okay.
So there's a Chinese company, and I can't remember the name of it, that sells desktop quantum computers. I think they still do, and the first one they brought out was like $50,000, and with a a real quantum computer, you're talking about millions and millions. And I think the Chinese company has got it down to a few $1,000s. And it really is a quantum computer. I mean, it, uses quantum principles to calculate. But it's tiny in terms of capacity. So like I said, the small quantum computers that seem to do something useful now are a couple of hundred qubits. Qubits are like bits, but bigger in terms of capacity. The desktop machines they use more or less the same technology as MRI. When you have to go and get an MRI, it's pretty much that technology. And they're about 10 bits or 12 bits, and you can't do anything really worthwhile other than say, I've got this really cool computer. It's just, I can think of a few things where, little Johnny has his quantum computer in the future, but it's a bit of a strain. What's much, much more likely is that you'll have smaller quantum computers. So you do get, mostly companies who use quantum computing now lease from some of the big companies who are in the quantum computing business, notably IBM. But a few are beginning to get their own machines. And the one that always gets quoted is the Cleveland Clinic. And the reason for having your own machine is the reason why people get their own computers rather than lease. I mean, it's no different from what it was back in the 70s or something. If you really want to use a lot of time on a machine, it becomes cleaner as well as cheaper to get your own machine. It's just expensive. And there are some ways of doing quantum computing that lend themselves to smaller machines. And the main reason for that is a lot of the functioning machines now use superconducting technology. So you have to go out and buy a giant fridge, and they cost about $1 million. And that obviously adds a lot of money to the quantum computer. And I don't know about your wife, but if I bought a fridge for $1 million, she would not be thrilled about it. So there's a technology such as ion trap that doesn't need anything quite as extreme as that, and suggests you could have smaller computers that use ion trap technology, much smaller than the superconducting one, and intrinsically so. But if ultimately one costs $1 million and one costs 10 million, very much like the revolution that happened in the 60s and 70s with regular computers, where there were suddenly these mini computers that made large scale computing, heavy scale computing possible. And the same thing is not happening, but will soon happen with quantum computers.
Yeah, I was a little overexcited with the whole room temperature semiconductor story that turned out to be a false flag or red herring. But
Yeah, well, it's
there are
not a
lots.
red herring, because it wouldn't surprise me if somebody got to that eventually, but nobody's really expecting it yet. And if there are I think there are room temperature quantum computers, but they're very non-powerful. That's the right way of putting it. Yeah, it's room temperature, but you can't actually do anything with it. That's not so good. So we've got a long way to go. And if that was what you were saying, it's absolutely true.
So tell us about this concept of quantum supremacy that I hear every few months. Someone takes the crown. Why is this such an important milestone in the field, and why is it constantly changing? And
I
does it matter that a Chinese company versus an American company has it? Or I guess it does with our new
Well, I,
geopolitical system.
so just to be clear, quantum supremacy has nothing whatsoever to do with competition between China and America.
Okay.
Exactly. It is has sort of a technical meaning. What a lot of the big companies in this space is trying to demonstrate is that they can they have a computer that can solve problems that a regular computer could not solve. And that's what's usually claimed to mean quantum supremacy. It sounds like it's, oh my God, the Chinese have got this and we haven't. And actually there's some truth to that, but that's not what, when people, if you picked up a book on quantum supremacy, there wouldn't be many reference to Chinese machines, I don't think, unless it was actually a book about Chinese machines. But it's more complicated than that. For a start, there's no claim at all by anyone that quantum computers can solve every problem, and that there aren't many, many, many instances where a regular classical computer can't do a better job than than a quantum computer in many cases. And again, the IBM paper I mentioned shows that they really come into their own in very complex situations. But the other thing, which is more nuanced, is that so the first big fight over quantum supremacy was really when Google announced they'd achieved quantum supremacy. But it's how can I put it? In mathematics, there's a way of demonstrating things, existence proof, by showing that a particular problem exists and can be solved with a quantum computer, but the problem itself may be utterly useless. And that's just, my undergraduate degree was mathematics, and that's just pretty standard stuff. So and I'm really not taking sides here because I don't want to. But the first time Google claimed it had quantum supremacy, it came up with a problem that could be solved by its computer and could not be solved by a classical computer, therefore the quantum computer. But the problem, and this wasn't controversial, had no meaning whatsoever. It's and it's also important to understand, I think I mentioned this already, that some very, very simple problems can't be solved by quantum computers very easily, and never would be. I mean, the thing that comes up in most books is, what's 1 + 1? It's 2. We'll demonstrate that on a quantum computer. Can't. Very hard to do, because a quantum computer is essentially statistical. So 1 + 1 ends up giving you the answer, whatever it is, 1.9743. I have no idea. It's actually closer than that, but that isn't why people are building quantum computers.
Got it. Well, let's shift a little bit to some of the ethical challenges around quantum technology. Of course, security and privacy are the main issues. So how would you define, is it breaking any encryption in use today? Is that the main challenge? And
so it's complicated, and we probably do not. Well, we definitely do not have a quantum machine that's powerful enough to break, public key encryption of the kind that everybody uses, including the military. But we will. But it's and if you put some very strong requirements on a machine that can cause a lot of harm, it's possible that's still 10 years away or something. However, a lot of harm can be done today. For instance, the most obvious case is, you steal the plans to the plane, and you can't break the code now, but it's in your vault now, and you can, 10 years from now or 5 years from now, you can break it. And a lot depends on whether you want to break in real time. So if you look at what the Brits did in the Second World War, breaking German codes for U-boat locations, that had to be in real time, because you wanted to know when they were going to attack. But if you're trying to break information on a plan for aircraft or a car or something, it doesn't have to be in real time at all. You can work on it. And these things are never absolute. Maybe we can't break everything that we steal or we find, but we can break some parts of it. Oh dear, 70% of the secret is still kept, but 30% isn't. And there's just a lot of power in a quantum computer. Ironically, the public key encryption that's now used standard by everybody was probably the worst thing they could have come up with all those years ago, 40 years ago, actually, because there are things that are harder to break. So on top of everything else, NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, just came out with some recommendations for new algorithms that are much, much harder to break. Are there algorithms that are impossible to break? We know for a fact there aren't. So this is a problem we've always had with codes, and we're about to have a new generation of problems. So that's a little troubling. But
And the cat and mouse race continues.
yeah,
And also on the cryptography side, there's a lot of work being done.
right. And that's really what I was talking about.
Okay.
Coming up with new cryptography codes, if you like, that can't easily be broken by a quantum computer.
Right.
It's just, like I said, it's just one of those things that we seem to have picked something that could be broken relatively easy with a quantum computer before there were quantum computers. So, someone was not watching over us, I guess.
Yeah, I saw some vendor advertising their quantum-proof encryption algorithms. So that seemed like a lot of marketing hype. I don't know how you make a claim like that.
It is and it isn't. It is hype in the sense that there's always going to be somebody who breaks the code. There's a book I read about code breaking and code making, and years ago, and it began saying there's never been a cipher that can't be broken. And I don't think anything we're doing now with quantum computing is changing that one little bit. And if we have this conversation in 20 years' time, being saying the same thing. But what is true is that we've, pretty much throughout the public, through business and various areas, we've assumed that public key encryption initially was unbreakable, and then it was breakable, but nobody could really, and now suddenly we can break it. And the story is that, well, we knew how to break it for many years with classical computers, but it would pick a number. I've heard 9 million years to break the code. And, I'm not too worried if people find out all my secrets in 9 million years' time. Or maybe I should be, but I'm not. And then with quantum computers, it becomes something more like 9 minutes. And again, I think these numbers are sort of picked out of a hat, but the point's still there.
Got it. So what's the current state of the art in quantum hardware, and what has to happen for the next big breakthrough to overcome the stability challenges and really scale to the next level? Is it just going to be a linear process, or does
no, it probably isn't, because there's too many dimensions that things can change in. And like 5 or 6 years ago, people talked about it simply in terms of the number of qubits. Well, 1,000 qubits is better than 200 qubits. But you've already said it. It also depends on the stability of the qubit. Some very early machines had 5,000 qubits, but the qubits themselves were very unstable, and that detracts from the ability, detracts from the ability to do a calculation. So longevity of the qubits becomes very important, and there are different measures. On top of that, I said at the beginning that there were maybe 30 different companies. That's probably about right, making either making full stack quantum computers, big things that sit in a room, or making QPUs, which is like a CPU, but it's a QPU. and they all use slightly different technologies. So in my judgment, there's a good chance that somebody will make some kind of breakthrough using a non-standard technology, but that's simply based on probabilities that somebody's going to do a better job than somebody else. But and some of those companies are quite small and not well funded, but they have very interesting ideas and very bright people working for them. I mean, the biggest company that's in quantum computing, literally in quantum computing now, is IBM. There's a surprise, right? So, but they have a fairly conventional way to doing this, but that's IBM, and they're still leading the market. So,
yeah, I mean, the people there, the talent, the work being done practically put computers together is pretty amazing. Who else, is doing cutting edge work, would you say? Other companies or research institutions,
well,
universities,
all of
vendors?
the above, and
Okay.
you really wouldn't want me to go through all of them, even if I could. But some of the companies that jump out are well, actually Google,
Mm-hmm.
and which is looking at a very long-term solution. Be like a god computer, and Microsoft. Again, both those companies are using different approaches, and they don't actually have practical projects yet because they're looking like, I shouldn't say this, but it's like 1,000 qubit machines or million qubit machines. I don't even remember.
Wow.
And that would be super spectacular, but that's where they're headed. And of course, they have the kind of money where they can do things like that. If I was to set up a quantum computing company and go to my local VC and ask for the money so I could do a million qubit computer, I'd be seriously laughed at. So there's companies like that. Honeywell, which isn't a computer company, still does some quantum sensors and things in its own name, but also has a separate company that is building a quantum computer under the name Quantinuum. And there's companies like that. And then there's probably a couple of dozen companies building QPUs, either VC funded or building them as part of institutes. So if you look in Holland, which is we work with the Dutch very closely on our conferences, and so I know quite a lot what's going on. QTech, which is part of it's part of University of Delft. It's more complicated than that, but I'll spare you. Are building small computers and have commercial spin-offs from them. They don't have very many qubits, but they're real enough.
So it sounds like it's being dominated by tech giants today, but there are startups in this space. What are they doing, and what are their challenges and opportunities as early stage companies who aren't?
Right. I mean, I'm not sure that the challenges and opportunities is all that different for them than it would be for a what's the word, very innovative startup. There's a lot that can go wrong, and anybody who puts $10 million into a quantum company, could come away an extraordinarily wealthy person, or wave their $10 million goodbye. It's that kind of thing. There have been some success stories, though. So there are several companies already that have gone public based on new technology. Probably the one that jumps out is IonQ, which uses trapped ions technology and has done quite well in the market. Rigetti, which is just named after the guy who founded it, that uses superconducting technology, much like IBM. they're still around. They've had some challenges. I would probably, I mean, it seems like they've had personnel challenges as well. You can look up what I'm referring to. But they have a technology that's similar in many ways to IBM. Um, but there's money for this stuff for sure. Um, uh, but still be improved in many cases. So.
Indeed, yeah, yeah. So I'm here in Las Vegas for a big event. It's VMware's annual
Uh-huh.
get together, of course. Tech giant in their own right in the cloud computing space. But there's no talk of quantum computing anywhere that I've seen. Is it too early for just the mainstream businesses with their IT infrastructures to think about quantum or to get involved in this space, or what say you?
So I'd say that's beginning to change,
Mhm.
but very slowly. And I honestly, no offense, I don't know much about VMware, but if you look at RSA, the conference
Mm.
RSA, 5 or 6 years ago, there was no reference to quantum, and quantum security companies did not appear at RSA. Well, they probably did, but there's like one, and it was a curiosity. I didn't get them anywhere. But now you're seeing some of the big ones actually appear at
Oh
RSA.
wow.
Certainly in the last 2 years, and you're seeing little things appear. I should also say that one of the other things I do with my life is I write about telecom industry. And
Mm.
if you go to a big telecom event now, you see things happening on the quantum networking front as events. So you are beginning to see more of that. And I think people are getting more worried about, intercepts from quantum computers. Not so much that it's going to happen tomorrow, but that it's a very real problem. And again, you have to be the kind of concern that is going to be worried about things like that. You want to take all my emails off this machine and read every one of them. You'll die of boredom, of course, but I'd be more than happy. It's things like, make sure you bring cabbage home tonight, sweetheart. So um, some things just aren't worth encrypting, and even if it's built into the software to encrypt, they're still not worth encrypting. But for a lot of businesses, it will become a concern. I mean, even quite small businesses that are concerned about security will look into this, and I'd say we're at the cusp of that happening already.
Interesting. Well, let's chat about the big societal picture. Take AI for example. It's something you were probably studying at the London School of Economics and elsewhere in the 80s and 70s, and yet it reached this tipping point where it's become on every headline and everyone's mind this year and last year. What is the potential for quantum if it does have this 1,000 million qubit breakthrough? What's the effect on society? Who will be
Well,
disrupted?
that's really good question, and I mean, AI has been around a long time. You mentioned LSE and everything, but actually, I was going to do a PhD on AI, and I would have done it in 1970.
Okay,
Not LSE, I would have done it at the University of Edinburgh, but your point is taken. But it
I
was
get the idea. Yeah.
very primitive stuff then. Now it looks. I mean, I'm not an expert on AI, but it seems to me that a lot of the stuff I remember reading about in AI back in the early 70s hasn't changed that much. But what has changed is to make it work in a spectacular fashion, you need very powerful processors. And they could be the kind of processors, GPUs that NVIDIA puts out, or they could be, an IBM quantum
Mm,
processor. And then the sky's the limit
mm,
because a journalist said to me, "Well, I know we can't really break all these codes right now, but and that isn't going to change for a while. But what happens if we use, uh, not just quantum technology, but quantum technology enhanced with AI? Will we be able to
Mm.
break it? And I hadn't. This is quite a while ago, and I hadn't really thought about that. But the answer is absolutely. So the threat gets worse when you add the two together. Not that it's not challenging, and of course, you know, just making that happen is very easy to say and much harder to do. But another issue is really, can you use AI with let's say encryption, but not with encryption, with quantum to do deep fakes of things? And the answer is absolutely. So if if you have a picture of I don't know, an invasion from space, you could make it look very realistic and scare the bejesus out of people.
Yeah, there was a good Black Mirror episode where an entire reality was constructed out of
Yeah,
a quantum computer, a lifelike immersive reality, and I thought that was fascinating with the unlimited power. But that was science fiction, so it seems like we might not be that far away in our sort of lifetime. So
well, I
very
think it's fair
exciting.
to say that it's no longer science fiction, because you can imagine it becoming science fact.
Mm,
Whether it is depends on costs and how far you have to go to do something that's realistic. 'Cause it's
indeed.
a deep
So
fake.
as we wrap up here, tell us about IQT research. How can folks get involved in your conferences or enlist
Well,
your services or otherwise?
so our easiest way to do that is to go to our website, which tells you the most you're going to find about us, which is www.insidequantumtechnology.com, which discusses our research services, our technical services, our conferences. We do about 4 conferences a year. The one coming
Mm,
up will be in New York. We have a Nordics conference, which this year will be in Helsinki, where, by the way, there's a lot going on quantum-wise. We have a regular one in Holland, which is very oriented towards quantum networking. And I think I'm not allowed to announce our new innovations for next year, but we'll be expanding a bit more geographically. Also on the site is a list of the reports we sell. You can buy it from the site, or you can call us up and we'll send it to you.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for sharing your
Sure.
insights, and your enthusiasm is infectious, and it's great to see you so busy and engaged over these many decades. It must be very exciting to
It
be,
it
this
is.
long career, and yet it's the most exciting time right now. So that's a
Yeah.
good thing. All
Okay.
right.
Well, thanks again for
Thanks so
inviting me.
much, Lawrence. And I
Okay.
appreciate, thanks to viewers. Thanks for watching.
Yep.
Feel free to reach out with any questions or feedback.